Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, Friedrich Merz is said to be Germany's next chancellor after his opposition Conservative Party won the national election. Hamas has condemned Israel's decision to delay the release of the Palestinian prisoners, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns that Israel is ready to resume fighting in Gaza at any moment. And China has unveiled this year's #1 central document, outlining priorities for deepening rural reforms and advancing rural vitalization. We begin in Europe. Friedrich Merz is set to be Germany's next chancellor after his opposition Conservative Party won the national election. Merz has vowed to help Europe attain what he calls real independence from the United States. The 69-year-old leader will have to navigate challenges in the German economy and deep divisions over migration. Merz is expected to pull together a coalition government without working with the far-right Alternative for Germany party, which has surged to a historic second place. Peter Oliver reports from Berlin.
Well, the exit polls are in, and it shows that the Conservative Union, that's made up of the CDU and CSU, the CDU's Bavarian sister party, they're going to take around 30% of the votes, according to these exit polls, which do tend to be quite reliable here in Germany. The next task for them is going to be forming a government, and it's not going to be too easy. They've ruled out any type of coalition talks with the far-right AfD, who came in second, it would seem, in these elections, according to the preliminary data that's out there. AfD doubling the amount of votes, according to these exit polls, of course, than they picked up last time around in 2021. AfD is set to pick up just around 20% of the vote. When it comes to coalitions, then, what that means is the CDU are going to be looking to essentially who doesn't make it into the Bundestag. You have to get 5% of the vote for that to happen. Should the Liberals, the Free Democrats, not make that, which it looks like they won't at the moment, or the left-wing populists, the BSW, not make that mark, then there is a chance that there could be what's called a grand coalition. That's between the CDU, CSU and the Social Democrats. It would be very tight, though. If that doesn't work, you are looking now at multiple parties forming a coalition, and it was multiple parties not being able to agree that led us to the situation that we have this snap election in February. It was, of course, set originally for the autumn later this year, but it had to come about because of the collapse of the previous coalition government. This is an election, though, that's been fought on multiple issues, but one glaring one, and that is immigration, migration, refugee politics. 37% of those polled said that was the biggest issue for them, with 34% saying the economy and 14% saying foreign policy. However, during the debates, those other two issues have all had a migration element to them, and ultimately a lot of that has come from the introduction, the development of Alternative for Germany, the far-right party, who have really shifted the debate in politics here in Germany to the right. And it's seen parties like the CDU, like the Social Democrats to an extent, all speaking about toughening up their migration politics to try and take or try to keep a hold of some of those voters who've been flirting with Alternative for Germany. But as I say, it is the Conservatives that have won the most votes, but AfD have looked to have doubled the amount of votes that they picked up last time out in 2021, and almost certainly the AfD will be the main opposition party in the next Bundestag.
That was Peter Oliver on the German election. Moving to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Monday marks 3 years since the conflict began. Talks of a possible peace deal may be offering a glimmer of hope amid all the doom and gloom. But on the eve of the third anniversary, Russia launched its biggest drone strike yet, more than 260 drones. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also made a surprise announcement, saying he's ready to quit the presidency in exchange for peace or Ukraine's membership in NATO.
If, to achieve peace, you really need me to give up my post, I'm ready. I can trade it for NATO if there are such conditions, but I don't want to talk about it for a long time. I am focused on Ukraine's security today, not in 20 years. I am not going to be in power for decades.
Zelensky also appealed to U.S. President Donald Trump to understand his position and extend security guarantees to Kyiv. There have been calls in Ukraine and Russia for peace and negotiations to end the ongoing conflict. Yang Chenxi spoke to some Ukrainians and Russians for their views on the conflict.
For many Ukrainians, the country is fighting for survival, while torn between a deep desire for victory and the urgent need to end the suffering.
Everyone is strained, and the world has started to care less about our problems because everyone has their own priorities, business, money, and other matters. But here in Ukraine, it's about human lives. For me personally, I would accept an agreement, some kind of treaty for them to withdraw their troops. But in any case, I think negotiations are necessary, even if they happen in the West, just to bring this to an end sooner. It's hard to live in constant fear.
We've heard similar calls for peace in Russia, where citizens expressed concerns about everything from loss of life to inflation.
It's time to negotiate. Everyone is tired of the war, tired of it all. I think that's why most people are now pacifists. Many had deep personal ties to Ukrainians, but those have since fallen apart.
People are people, no matter their nationality, and they deserve to be treated with humanity.
In Ukraine, a Gallup poll conducted in late 2024 suggests that 52% of respondents expressed a desire for their country to negotiate an end to the conflict as soon as possible. But some Ukrainian experts believe that for negotiations to work, the country needs to join the Western military alliance, NATO.
You have to have a clear security guarantee that will say, if Russia attacks again, then everybody will be on the Ukrainian side and will protect Ukraine. Otherwise, it will continue. Otherwise, we will have a ceasefire, it will last for 1 month, and then the war will continue.
This is a course that Russia has firmly opposed.
The West forgets that one of the main reasons for the outbreak of the conflict was precisely his obsessive desire to drag Ukraine into NATO, to turn it into a springboard for confrontation with Russia.
While NATO leaders have claimed that Ukraine is now on an irreversible path towards membership, no formal invitation has been extended. In February, Ukraine's NATO aspirations were dealt a fatal blow by the Trump administration.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement.
They've been saying that for a long time, that Ukraine cannot go into NATO. And I'm okay with that.
Uncertainty looms over the still murky path to a resolution. The conclusion of this 3-year conflict does not seem to be something Ukraine can determine on its own with Russia. The world is watching how parties involved navigate the situation. The clock is ticking.
That was Yang Chenxi reporting. Meanwhile, Russia's actions in Ukraine have led to a slew of sanctions from the West, with the EU announcing the 16th package of restrictions last week. But Russia has adapted with changing supply routes and alternative trade partners to grow its economy. Dasha Chinishova reports from Moscow.
Heading into the 4th year of its military operation in Ukraine, Russia has gone to great lengths transforming its economy to withstand international economic sanctions and serve the needs of the military-industrial complex. Despite being the most sanctioned country in the world, Russia recorded economic growth of 4.1% in 2024 and 3.6% in 2023. Official data shows Russia's nominal GDP exceeded 200 trillion rubles, or around $2.2 trillion last year. Federation Council Chairwoman Valentina Matviyenko labeled this result an economic miracle achieved despite sanctions and said it would be studied by future economists. But that miracle comes with a price. Russia's central bank was forced to hike key interest rate to 21% in 2024 in the face of record annual inflation, which reached 10% year on year. All that is felt by millions of Russians who see an increase in the price of basic staples and services. Economists have been warning of the risks of economic overheating and said some cooling down is now starting. Another feature of the transformed Russian economy is higher spending on defense and national security. In 2025, it accounts for around a third of Russia's budget and reached some $150 billion. All that, as President Vladimir Putin said Sunday, that meeting the needs of the troops fighting in Ukraine and boosting the armed forces are Russia's key strategic priorities.
That was Dasha Chinisheva in Moscow. Turning to the Middle East, Hamas has condemned Israel's decision to delay the release of the Palestinian prisoners, calling it a deliberate attempt to evade its commitments under the ceasefire deal. Hamas says it will not hold talks with Israel through mediators on further steps of the ceasefire agreement unless the Palestinian prisoners are released as agreed. Rami Almagari has more from Gaza.
Hamas is saying it is very committed to the ceasefire. There's been some kind of contact between Hamas and the mediators in a way that would ensure the release of the Palestinian prisoners whose release has been delayed by the Israeli government. Hamas says that this could prolong the first phase. This could endanger the ceasefire itself between Israel and Hamas, especially there have been some kind of what Hamas says violations by the Israeli army of the ceasefire, including the non-implementation of the humanitarian protocol of the ceasefire through which Israel must or should actually allow the entry of humanitarian aid machineries needed for the repair of Gaza, mobile homes and tents, as well as the shootouts by the Israeli army against the population of Gaza, particularly in the southern parts of the region. The ceasefire is endangered unless there will be some kind of an intervention by the mediators, which seems to be upcoming in the upcoming few days or hours.
That was Rami Almagari in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that Israel is ready to resume fighting in Gaza at any moment, vowing to achieve its objectives by any means. Israel continues its offensive, with tanks entering the West Bank for the first time since 2002. The defense minister says troops will remain there for the coming year. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
The Israeli claim is that Hamas has been carrying out ceremonies which are seen as nothing less than humiliating in every hostage release, even when the bodies were released. Last Thursday, Israel claims that it was done with a very humiliating ceremony. For example, Israel says that the hostages, before they were freed, they were actually forced to kiss their captors on the forehead. Not only that, Hamas also showed how it brought other hostages that are not released, to showcase to them and through them to Israel, to show them watching their friends being released while they are not. And that is why, for the moment, Israel is delaying the release of the prisoners that were set to be released on Saturday. So if we look at the West Bank, the Defense Minister Israel Katz said he ordered the army to stay in those places, specifically the Jenin refugee camp and the Nur Shams refugee camp outside the city of Tulkarem, for months and months to come, possibly even a year. These are places where that have seen a lot of militant action and for continued Israeli military presence in the area. That's as far as the West Bank. And in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, and even further north in an area known as the Bekaa Valley, in northeastern Lebanon, Israel has acted, saying that it targeted the ammunition sites belonging to Hezbollah. And those are sites, just the fact that ammunition is stored there, that is a breach of the ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. And finally, in China, the country has unveiled this year's #1 central document outlining priorities for deepening rural reforms and advancing all-around rural vitalization. The document emphasizes strengthening China's ability to supply key agricultural products such as grains and preventing the large-scale re-emergence of extreme poverty, a critical bottom line. It also highlights plans to increase farmers' incomes. As the first policy statement released by China's central authorities each year, the #1 document is seen as a key indicator of the government's policy priorities. Huang Yue has the details.
The document outlines a comprehensive plan to boost China's agricultural production, enhance rural industries, and improve farmers' livelihoods. One of the top priorities is ensuring the national food security. The document calls for stabilizing grain production, increasing per-unit yields, and taking multiple measures to consolidate the progress made in expanding soybean cultivation. It emphasizes on supporting the stable development of the livestock industry, like the hog production, the beef and dairy cattle production. It also strengthens policies on farmland protection and agricultural technology innovation, such as advancing smart farming and bio-breeding technologies. It's worth mentioning that in this year's document, China for the first time used the term new quality productive forces in agricultural sector, a term referring to high-tech, high-efficiency farming innovations. Some analysts say this is not just about improving farming techniques, but also about transforming rural industries through digitalization and modern supply chains. Beyond food security, preventing large-scale rural poverty relapse remains a key focus, as 2025 marks the final year of the transition period after China's victory over absolute poverty alleviation. The government pledges to maintain targeted support for vulnerable populations, like the low-income groups and relocated rural populations. In the meantime, it highlights the importance of county-level economic development in driving rural prosperity. The government aims to develop rural industries with local characteristics, such as organic farming, food processing, rural tourism, and e-commerce. This also includes support for farmers' cooperatives and family farms, ensuring that they also receive financial and policy incentives. Expanding income sources for farmers is very crucial. The document promotes home-based businesses, forestry and ecotourism, and employment programs for rural workers. And policies such as wage protection for migrant workers and financial support for elderly rural laborers will help stabilize their incomes and improve their livelihoods. And moreover, the document also highlights infrastructure development in rural areas, emphasizing better rural roads, water supply systems, and digital connectivity.
That was Huang Yue reporting. Now, recapping the headlines before we go, Friedrich Merz is set to become Germany's next chancellor after his opposition Conservative Party won the national election. Hamas has condemned Israel's decision to delay the release of Palestinian prisoners, while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that Israel is ready to resume fighting in Gaza. And China has resumed this year's #1 central document, outlining priorities for deepening rural reforms and advancing rural vitalization. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, the podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics and business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We would welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.